Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
We all know the urban legend of the Hook, a serial killer prowling secluded back roads at night with a hook for a hand, searching for young couples alone in a car. As the popularity of the Lover's Lane grew in the 1930s, so too did society's need to discourage its youth from visiting remote locations with a romantic partner for amorous meetings. Eventually, real-life boogeymen would capture the nation's fear as killers such as the Zodiac, Colonial Parkway murders, or the Phantom Killer of Texarkana found the isolation and vulnerability of couples in cars an enticing target. But nearly a full decade before the Texarkana Moonlight Murders would make headlines, another killer was stalking the remote areas outside of Trenton, New Jersey with a remarkably similar MO. While these other Lover's Lane killers have gone down in infamy today as the subjects of books, movies, and TV, Trenton's serial killer has largely been forgotten about today. Though police would arrest a suspect and bring an end to the panic-stricken city, the methods they used to obtain a confession and conviction leave a great deal of doubt on his guilt. Nearly a century later, it is unlikely we may ever know the real name of this killer. But for those who lived through his bloody rampage, his moniker will never be forgotten. This is the story of the Duck Island Shotgun Stalker.
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
The death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
If you know Ruin Road, you know we value our privacy. In our personal life, it's not always easy to maintain. Whether we know it or not, sites will mine our data like full name, email, health records, and more, which they will sell to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants to snoop. That's why we started using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows us which data brokers are selling our personal information and automatically submits opt-out requests on our behalf. This not only reduces the amount of spam you'll get, but protects against hackers who can use this information to gain access to our social media, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also provides a ton of other features bundled into one easy-to-use app at an affordable price. You get antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without needing to bother with different apps. We all have one or more of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll know how often that happens. Like 24-hour security, motion sensors, and guard dogs, Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping my info safe so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. Relaxing. Ruin Road values our privacy, and we also value yours. Go to aura.com/ruinroad to start a free 2-week trial, also linked below in the description. Sitting just south of Trenton, New Jersey, along the banks of the Delaware River, Duck Island has always been a place apart from its surroundings. The low-level swampland has been unsuitable for most habitation, and as Trenton grew in the 20th century, the roughly 2-square-mile area, which is technically a peninsula, was used mostly as a landfill. During Prohibition, bootleggers had used the remote area to make moonshine, and Ellery Queen used the desolate setting for their 1936 thriller, Halfway House. Today, several warehouses have sprung up on the land, and the former Duck Creek that separated from the mainland has been partially filled in since 1947, while Lamberton Road remains the sole street winding north to south through the thick woods, which have grown up since the 1930s, when the island was described as a desolate stretch of land covered with scrub grass marshy underbrush, and stunted trees. At that time, Lamberton would dead-end roughly 1.5 miles up at the oil terminal, while a small marina occupied the northernmost tip. But the stretch in between was a desolate no man's land. Couples found this isolated section perfect for a place to get away for some privacy, using the dirt trails that went off from Lamberton as their lovers' lanes. Around 1938, a few short trails would head down to the river, while 2 main turnoffs ran eastwards. Today, neither of those trails exist, with the first being exactly here, going through what is the parking lot of the Duck Island Recycling Center. The next is 0.4 miles down the road here, leading down into the thick brush which has grown up significantly in the nearly 100 years. Both of these trails would end about 600 feet back to where the Delaware and Raritan train tracks run perpendicular about 600 feet from Lamberton Road. Today, past that is New Jersey Interstate 29, which would not be built through the area until the late 1980s. It was a rainy night on November 8, 1938, when a car turned down onto the first of these trails, parking about 500 feet back, roughly where the Delaware and Raritan hiking trail now runs on this side of the creek. Inside the car was 20-year-old Vincenzo Tanzillo and his girlfriend, 15-year-old Mary Mijatovic. As the two were in the back seat, someone described as a short, stocky African-American male would rip the door open and growl that this was a stick-up. He ordered Tanzillo out of the vehicle and jabbed him in the gut with the shotgun he was pointing. When the boy fell, the gun fired, killing him instantly as his carotid artery and jugular vein were ripped open. Mary ran from the car, but was shortly caught, with the killer bending her over a large rock before placing the shotgun against her rear end and firing. The blast this time tearing through her bladder and exiting the other side through her vagina and thighs. Some discrepancy remains on whether he would sexually assault her before or after the shooting, with doctors finding it hard to believe he could have after because, quote, there was nothing much left. Either way, after the deed, he would beat her further and leave her for dead. Mary managed to crawl back to the vehicle where she used Vincenzo's jacket to try and stop her bleeding until a short while later, around 8 p.m., when another couple driving along Lamberton Road heard her screams and phoned police, who would find the grisly scene. Police would round up 5 African-American men who are currently living in an abandoned brick kiln along the river and bring them to the hospital where Mary was. Despite one of them having scratches on his arm and nose, the dying girl would shake her head, only able to get out the words, "too big." 36 hours after the attack, Mary Mijatovic would succumb to her wounds, and the mystery would take a turn. Though she had told police she was shot while she was sitting inside the car, her autopsy would prove how she was shot against the rock, and when investigators learned that Mary's father had forbidden her from seeing Vincenzo, they hypothesized she may have made up the story of an African-American killer to cover for someone else. Vincenzo lived in a home that used to stand here on Walnut Avenue in Trenton's Greenwood and Hamilton neighborhood, southeast of downtown, along with his pregnant wife. That night, he had taken her to a relative's home because she did not want to be alone when he told her he had to work a night shift at his job, a gravel company across the river in Pennsylvania. Instead, Vincenzo would pick up Mary, who snuck out of her home on nearby Steamboat Street, and the two lovers went to Duck Island. All of their relatives were questioned and cleared, as were a group of hunters. But the prime suspect was a 33-year-old African-American man who was said to be the leader of a group called the Scouters, a group of voyeurs that spied on lovers on Duck Island. The Scouters would often come in pairs, hiding behind specially constructed camouflage barriers to watch the couples.
They had even worked out a special signal to identify themselves to other scouters, and would sometimes photograph the couples as they had intercourse. Another theory was a Trenton youth who said he had a date scheduled to marry that night, but she stood him up. However, one by one the leads fizzled out, and the case went cold. Over the following year, many in the United States watched overseas as Europe became an increasingly tense continent. First, with Spain's fall to fascism, when General Francisco Franco would win the Spanish Civil War and start a decades-long dictatorship. Meanwhile, Adolf Hitler's power would continue to grow alongside fellow Axis alliance of Benito Mussolini in Italy, culminating with the September 1939 invasion of Poland. Though little actual combat would take place through the end of the year, and the United States remaining neutral, it was the end of that very same month, and 11 months after the first attack, that the Duck Island Killer would return. It was the morning of Sunday, October 1st, 1939, when 40-year-old Pemberton Wetmer came to Duck Island to do his usual routine of hunting for junk, which he would then resell. He would notice a car parked along one of the dirt trails, so he went down the other ones until an hour later, when he saw the car was still there and decided to head down anyways. As he got about 30 feet away from the vehicle, he approached a pile of trash that seemed to be stacked back up after he had scattered it about the previous weekend looking for items, at which time he had found a prosthetic leg inside the pile. This time, when he saw a pair of legs sticking out from the bottom of the pile, he assumed it was likely mannequin's legs. But when he gave them a slight kick, he discovered they were real. Frank Casper was a 28-year-old mechanic who lived in the home at 15 Elm Street in Trenton's Chestnut Park neighborhood with his wife and children. But unbeknownst to his family, Frank was having an affair with his best friend's wife, 36-year-old Catherine Werner, who lived just 5 houses down at number 5 Elm Street. It was Saturday night, September 30th of 1939, when Catherine told her husband she wanted to go shopping. As he wanted to play pinochle, Frank offered to drive her on the rainy night. Instead, the pair drove to Duck Island to be away from prying eyes, and parked about 100 feet east of the main road down the second trail. As they were in the back seat of the car, someone stuck a shotgun in through the open right window and fired, sending the shotgun pellets into Frank's face and neck, killing him instantly. The blast also virtually amputated Catherine's hand, which they believed she raised to shield herself, meaning she had either seen the gunman or heard him. She would escape out the left side of the car, but the killer caught up and beat her, the killing blow coming from a piece of cement that caved in her skull. He would then drag her corpse another 25 feet by some bushes and cover her up with cardboard and leaves, placing the bloody concrete under her head. Though it was stated they did not believe she had been sexually assaulted, her clothing was noted as being in disarray, and her stocking had been pulled down. Though this could have been from inside the car with Frank, as an empty package for a new pair of silk stockings and a blood-stained empty pocketbook were found nearby. Police would investigate both spouses, who seemed totally shocked to learn of the affair, and the families were all cleared. Recalling the previous year's murders that had taken place just a few hundred yards away, someone decided to compare the shotgun shells to that murder, finding that the firing pin markings on the shells were identical. Both crimes had occurred on rainy nights following a full moon. Both couples lived in the same general area of southern Trenton, and rumors that a tall man dressed in a priest's outfit had been seen around Duck Island the night of the murders spread, but could never be substantiated. Believing that other couples likely had run-ins with the killer, Police Chief Richard P. Brettel made a public plea for others to come forward with information, promising any illicit stories would be held in strict confidence. The first lead came when 29-year-old Chester McGahee was overheard saying that he had been parked with a girl less than 50 feet from Frank's car when the murders happened, and that he fled because he feared he would be considered the killer. Police eventually ruled he was lying, though others who were in fact parked on the Lover's Lane at the time stated they heard two men arguing just before two shots rang out, and everyone except for Frank's car would speed away. On October 5, 1939, both victims would be buried inside the St. Stanislaus Cemetery in Trenton, though the funerals were held at different times of the day. It was during Frank's service when his father-in-law noticed a man snapping photos from afar, and in anger, the Casper family rushed him and smashed the camera. As confusion spread, people began beating the man, believing he was the killer. Police were able to save him, but then another rumor spread that one of the relatives of the group had taken their own life in the commotion. As the anniversary of the first murder approached, police were on high alert, staking out the murder sites and kicking out any couples foolish enough to come to Duck Island. But with the romantic getaway closed off, couples simply began searching out new remote locations for private trysts. The only problem was, the killer had sought out those areas as well. Quite literally just across the river from Duck Island, Tyburn Road in Pennsylvania has changed significantly since 1940, as has the landscape. Today, the bus reservoir has been created, flooding what at that time was farmland, with the new Tyburn Road acting as a double lane that runs into Falsington, Pennsylvania. But back then, Tyburn was another dirt road used as a lover's lane, and where Joseph and Claire Trinati parked on August 7, 1940. 30-year-old Joseph had wed 19-year-old Claire just a week prior, but they kept the marriage a secret from her family. That night, around 9 p.m., they were sitting along Tyburn talking in the front seat when they heard what sounded like a stone hit their car, right before an African-American man appeared alongside the passenger side window and demanded money. Joseph would give him a dime, saying that was all he had. The man demanded his wallet, but Joseph instead gave him his wristwatch. Still not satisfied, the man demanded money from Claire and ordered Joseph to leave. No doubt remembering the Duck Island slangs, Claire was not about to stick around and tried to run with her husband. But when she tripped, the attacker pounced, slashing her 6 times with a knife. Once along the face, 3 roughly 12-inch cuts to her side and pelvic area, and a 24-inch slash across her back. He only stopped and fled when he noticed that Joseph had managed to flag down a passing car for help. Police barely had a chance to wonder if these were connected to the Duck Island murders when the very next night, another woman was attacked. Running perpendicular to Tyburn Road, about 1.5 miles south of it is Oxford Valley Road. Yet again, it has changed greatly over the decades. But around here, where the Oxford Valley Public Golf Course is today, is where the Ponzek family orchard stood. 44-year-old Mary Ponzek had collected her laundry from a clothesline and had just crossed back over the road where her house was across the street when a man asked her what direction Bristol was. When she pointed, he tried to grab her. When she fought, he hit her on the head with a stone and then started beating her with a stick before fleeing. Mary was able to stagger back home with a gash on her forehead and shout to her family. As a neighbor drove her to the hospital, Mary's husband and 2 sons began searching the area for her attacker, but yet again, he had vanished. Though she said it was dark and hard to tell, she stated her attacker appeared to be a Caucasian male wearing a white shirt and light straw hat. 3 months later, in the same area along Tyburn Road, it happened again. It was the night of November 2nd, 1940, when 19-year-old Howard Wilson and 18-year-old Irene Robbins, both of Bristol, were sitting in their car when they noticed an African-American man approaching them. He shouted for them to open their doors, But the couple knew what would happen if they did, so Joseph turned his car on to flee when a shotgun blast would punch through his car door, shredding his arm. He managed to get the car in gear and sped 7 miles straight back to Bristol, collapsing on the front step of the hospital. Upon hearing what had happened, local police phoned Trenton to request those police stake out Duck Island in case the killer was crossing back over the river via boat. Howard Wilson would describe his attacker as about 5 feet 4 inches tall, 140 pounds, around 30 years old, and dressed in a cap and shabby clothing, while the Trenatis said their attacker was a slim man in his 30s with a slender face and sunken cheeks. In that attack, police would manage to collect fingerprints from the car door where he placed his hand as he leaned inside. Now, they just needed another opportunity to find a match. They did not need to wait long. Sitting about 3.5 miles northeast of Duck Island back in New Jersey, Cypress Lane was yet another secluded road used by lovers in 1940. Today, about half of the 1.5 mile long road has been turned into subdivisions, while Interstate 295 bisects that road from the last wooded section. Farmland took up most of the first part of Cypress Road, while the woods remain largely as they did back in 1940, when on November 17th, 35-year-old Ludovicum Kovacs and 27-year-old Carolina Marconi would park 20 feet down from the first dirt trail that used to exist here, just before the bend in the road and a 1/4 mile down from the nearest farmhouse. Police were patrolling this area as well, warning couples to leave, and when they passed by at 7:30 p.m., the lane was clear. However, when they returned at 10:35, they would spot a car and approach, only to discover the Duck Island killer had struck again, this time leaving no survivors. Nicknamed Lewis, Kovacs lived alone at this home on Roebling Avenue in South Trenton, where he worked as a clerk at the local Works Progress Administration Office, a program that was part of President Roosevelt's New Deal to combat the Great Depression, where those out of work were hired to build roads, camps, and infrastructure across America. 3 doors down lived the Marconi family. Carolina was a cigar maker at the American Tobacco Company, while her husband was a WPA laborer. It was around 6:30 that night when Carolina left the home with her daughters, saying they were going shopping. Instead, she dropped the child off at her sister's house on the same block and left with Kovacs. Mr. Marconi said apart from the car ride the two had taken together several years back, he was unaware they had ever spoken since. But as the two lovers were embraced in the back seat of the car, someone would fire buckshot into Lewis's back, piercing his heart. The next shot would shatter Carolina's arm, as well as piercing her heart and lung. Both were slumped in the seat. This time, the killer collected his shotgun shells. A girl who lived on the pig farm down the road reporting hearing the 2 gunshots around 8 p.m. This time, the panic was widespread. The county physician would state, every indication points to a repetition of the Duck Island slangs. Prosecutor Andrew Dutch stated, "We apparently have a madman here, just like Cleveland's Mad Butcher." As each of the murders had occurred about a year apart and within days of a full moon, papers would dub the killer the Moon Mad Maniac, the Spoonbill Slayer, or the Mad Killer of Duck Island. With an increasing pressure to solve the case, Prosecutor Dutch would send out postcards to all African American males in Trenton the following February, requesting they report to the courthouse for fingerprinting, a move that threw the city's minority population into an uproar, who noted that every time the shotgun stalker struck, police had upped their harassments of the African American population. But any fear and anger would suddenly be forgotten about on December 7, 1941, when Japan would bomb Pearl Harbor. Now, a lone man with a shotgun didn't seem so frightening. The United States was at war. But exactly 3 months later, the killer would yet again return. 25-year-old John Testa had just enlisted as a baker and was stationed at Fort Dix, an army base outside of Trenton. It was March 7, 1942, when out on leave, he would borrow his brother's car and pick up 26-year-old Antoinette Marcantonio, whom he had dated for the past 3 years. She had been suffering from a serious eye infection for the past 8 months, and John was proud to tell her he had just been promoted to corporal. After riding around for a bit, the pair pulled over in this area off Bordentown Road, about 3 miles south of Tyburn Road in Pennsylvania. Yet again, Van Siver Lake did not exist at that time, and farmland stretched out for miles after Tullytown Cemetery. They were only parked for a short time when suddenly a large African-American man ripped open the driver's side door and demanded money. In an all too familiar scenario, after he only received 30 cents, he demanded Testa's wallet. But before John had a chance to grab it, the man pressed his shotgun to his left arm and fired. Antoinette fled the car and began to run east into the then farmland. As the shotgun only held a single shell, the man chased her down and began to bash her on the head with the butt of the gun. Testa, meanwhile, was able to get the car started and began driving towards the fight with the goal of running the killer over. But that man managed to jump into the brush while Antoinette hopped back in the car, and they sped back to Bristol Pike, where John became too weak from blood loss and could drive no further. A passing car would stop and took them to the hospital, where John's arm would need to be amputated. A massive manhunt would go underway the following day for the man the couple described this time as in his 50s, slim, and about 5 foot 8 inches tall with a dark, round face. 200 police and volunteers would scour a 10-mile radius, but they would find their most promising clue in the grass where Antoinette was attacked. In the beating, the shotgun stock would break, and though the killer took the gun with him, a piece of wood was left behind, which had part of the serial number on it. As this was in a time before internet, it would take detectives 18 months to trace the serial number. But in the meantime, about 2 weeks after his latest attack, another man would have a run-in on the same road. 46-year-old Anthony Ebrick was driving back home along Bordentown Road from work around 3 a.m. on March 25th when he saw a tall African-American man walking along the road about a mile east of the Testa shooting, today part of the Tullytown Causeway. Putting out his gun to flag down the car, Ebrick noticed he was pulling a revolver out with his other hand and floored his gas pedal. The man fired 3 shots at the car, but all would miss. Ebrick was so shaken that he drove past his house in Tullytown and kept going, finally managing to get back, where it took him a while to calm down enough to say what had happened and use a neighbor's phone to call police about an hour after the shooting, by which time the attacker was long gone. Yet again, the attacks seemed to stop and the area's attention went back to World War II, as the Battle of Midway would take place over the summer, while the fight for Guadalcanal would rage through February 1943. Summer 1943 would see race riots break out across the country, primarily in Detroit and Harlem. It was September that same year, just as Italy would surrender to the Allied forces, that some movement occurred in the Duck Island case. Police had tracked the partial serial number of the shotgun stock to Samuel Kruger's pawn shop in Trenton. Again, there was a delay, as Samuel was not very diligent on record keeping. But it was eventually learned that 7 years ago, the single-barreled Harrington and Richardson shotgun was pawned by a man named Martin Keene. When interviewed, Keene, a Caucasian man, stated he held the pawn ticket for 3 years, until one day, when working for the WPA, the ticket fell from his wallet. After 6 months unclaimed, guns went to auction, so when another worker named Clarence asked if he could have that ticket, Keene gave it to him, thinking it was worthless. Next, police would check the WPA records to learn only 6 African-American men had worked on that project, and only one was named Clarence. Clarence Hill was a 33-year-old Sunday school teacher at the Mount Olivet Baptist Church in Trenton. He lived just a block to the north of the church at this home on Wilfrid Avenue with his parents after he would desert his wife and 2 children in 1938, which seemed to be the only blight on his record. Hill had been drafted into the Army in March 1943 and was currently stationed in South Carolina, where his company was due to ship overseas as part of a heavy truck unit. Police knew they had to act fast and brought Martin Keene with them to identify the man on December 29, 1943. According to the report, while Clarence initially denied everything, finally he relented and confessed to all 6 murders. He stated he had been drinking the night of the first murders and planned on just robbing them, but decided to leave no witnesses. He would be transferred back up to Fort Dix and officially charged. An army convoy would search the woods off Cooser Road, where he told them he buried the shotgun, just a 1.5 miles south of Cypress Lane. Scouring the area with metal detectors, dozens or more holes would be dug in attempts to locate the gun to no avail. Next, Clarence stated he may have buried it in his parents' basement, and the floor was excavated, yet again with no luck. Nevertheless, with signed confessions, the case seemed to slam dunk. And in December 1944, just as the Battle of the Bulge in Europe began, the trial commenced, and the cracks in the case became evident. None of the survivors were able to identify Hill as the man who attacked them due to the darkness and quickness of the attacks. The jury would visit the crime scenes themselves to see how dark it truly was out here. Kruger's pawn shop was only able to produce a record that the gun had not sold in auction and had been redeemed via ticket, but not by whom. Finally, when Clarence took the stand, he would tell that his supposed confessions had been beaten out of him. Amidst tears, he shared that when he was questioned in South Carolina, he had been forced to strip naked and beaten with nightsticks to the point where a scar from a previous operation tore open. His army commander would also pressure him to confess, and he was told the only way he could tell his side was by going to court. While a police doctor would state he found no signs of abuse, another doctor who had examined him a week after the alleged incidents would report he did find multiple bruises on Clarence's body. As the trial continued, the sequestered jury was taken out for a Christmas dinner and allowed to drive past their homes while they sang Christmas carols. Finally, on December 29, 1944, Clarence Hill was found guilty in the murder of Mary Mitovich, the only murder he was actually on trial for, despite being indicted in all 6 attacks. The all-white jury would recommend he be spared the death penalty, and he would receive a life sentence, something that would outrage the public, who had expressed a desire for a lynching. While Clarence was behind bars, and the Duck Island murders would cease, the evidence of racial inequality and injustice would come to nationwide attention just 4 years later with a case that is still remembered today as the Trenton 6. It was January 27, 1948 when 72-year-old William and Elizabeth Horner opened their secondhand furniture store on North Broad Street near the heart of Trenton, where this parking lot now sits today. Later in the day, a group of young African-American males entered the store and would smash a bottle over William's head, killing him. Several of them would sexually assault Elizabeth before leaving her for dead as well. Trenton prosecutor Andrew Dutch did not want a riot on his hands and gave out Thompson machine guns to his officers. And in less than 2 weeks, they had rounded up 6 young men who allegedly confessed. But yet again, Elizabeth was unable to identify her attacker, and no physical evidence existed. All 6 men would retract their confessions, stating it had been beaten out of them, as with Clarence Hill. But also as with Clarence, all of the men were found guilty. 4 of these men would be acquitted in 1951, another dying the year following, and the last of the Trenton 6 was released in 1954. But for the suspected Duck Island killer, the cogs of the legal system were not so kind. Clarence's initial appeal would never go to court after he was unable to raise enough funds to pay even the paperwork fees. His lawyer attempted to appeal directly to the governor for clemency, but would be denied. In 1951, Hill became eligible for parole, but each yearly review would yet again be rejected. 3 years later, the ACLU would petition the governor yet again, but it was not until 1963 when Clarence Hill's defense would find an unlikely ally in Leon Josephson, a lawyer with the American Communist Party. And in April 1964, Clarence Hill would be released on medical parole after he had developed throat cancer. By that time, his other 5 murder indictments had been dropped on the quiet admittance that this confession would no longer hold up in court due to present standards forbidding coercion. But freedom was short. Pennsylvania authorities were waiting to extradite Clarence on the attacks he had also been indicted for across the river, until New Jersey Governor Richard Hughes would deny the extradition request. After 19 years in prison, Clarence Hill was a free man. But if he was not the Duck Island killer, the real culprit had remained free this entire time. Just a year after he was convicted, the Moonlight Murders would begin in Texarkana. Over the span of 10 weeks, 4 Lovers Lane attacks would leave 5 people dead of a .32 caliber pistol. The killer wore a white sack on his head, and the only 2 survivors were in disagreement whether the killer was black or white. Perhaps more intriguingly, though, is the case of a Lovers Lane madman who was terrorizing the much closer Washington, D.C. at the very same time as the Duck Island murders. Just 2 days after the November 8, 1938 attack on Vincenzo Tanzillo and Mary Mijatovic, 23-year-olds John Clements and Mary Scarnecchia would park in what was then a secluded area outside of Chevy Chase, Maryland, just under 150 miles southwest of Trenton. The co-workers at the government printing office were both married, but not to each other. They had just parked their car when a large African-American male jumped out of the bushes and demanded John to exit the vehicle while using his jacket to mask his face. When John turned the car on to escape, the man fired 8 .32 caliber pistol shots into the side door, 3 of which struck Clements. The very next night, November 11, 1938, 31-year-old Edward Roper and 22-year-old Ruby Moore would pull over in the nearby Rock Creek Park, along with another couple in the back seat, when 6 bullets smashed through their windshield, killing Roper. Police submitted the bullets to see if they were linked, and warned couples to avoid lovers' lanes. But the very next night, it happened again. 19-year-old Calvin Proctor was almost back to his home on Alabama Avenue Southeast, on the opposite side of D.C., in the Douglas neighborhood, when a man rushed out from the bushes and tried to get him to stop. When he started to slow down, the man pulled out a gun and fired twice. While the survivors of the previous night never saw who shot at them, the bullets would be linked to the Clemens shooting. Just as Trenton was investigating their first slaying, DC had a madman of their own on the loose. Armed patrols began driving the streets, but 1 week later, the killer struck again. It was November 17th when 65-year-old Peter Murray and 40-year-old Edna Brown came to at what that time was the secluded Grubb Road in Upper Rock Creek Park. The pair, both widowers, were on their way to a dance in Silver Spring and had not even stopped their car when a man ran from the woods and jumped onto the hood, demanding them to pull into a secluded spot. After he was unhappy with the $5 cash Peter gave him, he snatched his wallet, and Peter asked if he could simply get his driver's license back. It was the last thing he would ever say. Without changing his expression, the man fired 11 shots into the car, killing Peter Murray with 5 of those bullets, while only 1 would hit Edna in the hip. As she began to scream, the man faded into the bushes, yelling if she didn't shut up, he'd blow her brains out. For an hour, Edna sat silent, terrified he was still watching her. It was only when another car began to approach that she began to scream for help. A massive manhunt was launched, and yet again, the bullets matched. As with Duck Island, police rounded up any suspicious African American man they could find, bringing them to the hospital bed of Edna Brown, who cleared each. Another couple would come forward that the night before this last attack, an African American man had held them at gunpoint as well, and verbally debated on whether or not he should shoot them. As quickly as these attacks seemed to begin, they ended, and with no arrests, they eventually would fade into obscurity. So too has the case of the Duck Island Killer. Post-release, Clarence Hill would live out the rest of his life in quiet solitude, traveling each day from his quaint apartment in Trenton to the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, where he began working as a custodian until he would pass away in 1973, maintaining his innocence until the end. It is unlikely we will ever know if Clarence Hill was guilty or a convenient scapegoat, just as it is unlikely that we will ever know if the killer who prowled Trenton's lovers' lanes ever visited Texas, DC, or any other states on moonlit nights, just waiting for someone to park nearby.